Hello, doers, builders, and shapers of tomorrow. You're all conductors of the world of work. Welcome to the Workestration podcast.
Good to see you. How are you?
Hello, good. How are you?
Welcome back. Today's recording of our next episode. So, who are we talking to today?
Today, we are going to talk to one of our shapers, Andus Labs. They are Generative AI Strategy and Leadership Advisory. And we're going to talk to two of their co-founders. The first co-founder is Jennifer McTiernan. Jennifer is a lawyer and operator who turns mission into execution. She co-founded City Seed in New Haven, growing one farmers market into a nationally recognized organization that generated over 22 million in economic impact by connecting local farmers to underserved communities before attending Yale Law School. Since she's graduated Yale Law School, she has worked with startups, tech companies as a legal and strategic advisor, including Square, now known as Block, and Ocho, a venture-based mission-driven insurtech. And at Andus Labs, she applies the same approach by translating values like equity, privacy, and trust into scalable systems that actually work.
How awesome. And Chris is another co-founder of Andus Labs. And before, he spent 2 decades leading innovation at Weber Shadwick, where he ran an early AI lab and advised Fortune 500 firms on digital transformation. He also is an author. He wrote The Perspective Agents, a guide for the AI age, exploring how technology changes culture and decision-making. Chris left the comfort of a known role to build something that doesn't sound like a typical business and rather residences that help executives think alongside machines. Together, they're building Andus Labs to address a gap. Organizations are flooded with AI tools, but lack the capability to integrate them at the required speed or understand what they're really for. We're so excited to have both Chris and Jennifer part of this conversation.
The Workestration podcast is an exploration in the evolving world of work, driven by the fundamental questions: where is work going? How can we make it better? And how do we get there? By engaging with diverse perspectives from doers, builders, shapers, the podcast aims to provide a comprehensive understanding of the future of work. Today, we're really excited to be here with Andus Labs.
Jennifer, Chris, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having us.
What a place to be. It's all
So-
about the future of work. Yes.
We're in the middle of it. We're building it. You're the builders. You're the shapers. You play all the roles that we're trying to target through these conversations. So let's start from the top, from the beginning. What is the genesis behind Andus Labs? Or first of all, educate us, what is Andus Labs? And then where the idea came from.
Okay, maybe Jennifer, I'll jump in
Yes.
for the origin story. So it's a personal one, if I'm being honest. There's a lot of discussion around what AI is going to mean for work. There's a lot of, I would say, opportunity in the space that many different firms, consultancies, technology companies are pursuing. It's a bit of a gold rush out there. And if we're being honest, we didn't necessarily start the company with this through the lens of, let's go find the money. We were really focused on how do we find the humanity in what's happening. And really the origin story goes back quite a long time. So my first job out of school was working with my father in what we would call a craft business, meaning he ran a graphic art studio in Detroit in the heyday of, call it the advertising age, working with some of the most prolific advertising spenders. And his shop was all about making the ads. So the ads weren't made at the time inside of agencies, they were made in studios. And he ran arguably the top studio in town, had a really great run, had a great life in the mix. And I joined him out of college. I would say a few years after something called the Macintosh was introduced. And then after the Macintosh was introduced, then software started to get loaded on it. So software we know today is Photoshop, PageMaker, Quark, that essentially took a lot of the craft work that was being done on the floor and it became encoded in software. More efficient, less expensive, easier to do than having a bunch of craftsmen in a firm do the work by hand. And the business we went out of business 2 years later. And so I felt a very long time ago, and this was my first job out of school, what it feels like to be automated and to be on the wrong side of a technology curve. And so people don't talk about desktop publishing as a major technology event, but it was a major event in our lives, our families' lives. It is really hard to be on the wrong side of that curve. So my entire career has really been from that formative moment, helping leaders see changes coming, prepare for them, and make sure that we're being as thoughtful as possible when we're on the right side of the curve. So now, after 25 years in the agency, sorry, this is a bit of a long intro, but it's important grounding. 25 years in the agency world, being in all things digital, AI is the big one. And thought this was a very appropriate time to start an AI and human-centric business from scratch and start to surface the questions and address the questions that need to be asked today. And I think that's in part why we're all on the call today, because we're all wrestling with the same questions. And then the question is, what are we going to do about it? And so Andus Labs is, call it a purpose-built company, tell people, understand AI, think with AI, and build new things with AI. That's our mission. That's on our homepage. And that's how Jennifer and I and the founding partners and others that we brought on board have started the company. So thanks for indulging me on a fairly lengthy open to the podcast today.
I had no idea. I come also from desktop publishing. That was my first job, but we can have a separate conversation on that.
So it resonates.
It totally. Jennifer, how about you?
Sure. I'd like to actually reference one of the first conversations that I had with Chris when we first met. And he said to me, AI is emotionally and psychologically difficult. And he said it from such a place of empathy and understanding. And at the time, I didn't know the story he just told. And when I learned that story, I was like, wow, now I understand why that conversation Chris and I had was so powerful. And Chris managed to capture something that I hadn't been able to put into words, which was, how was I going to handle this situation? And why did I have uneasy feelings about it? Curiosity, yes. A little sense of dread, certainly. And how could I manage this? And this goes back to the kind of person I am in the world, which is a pretty solidly type A person and someone who's developed domain expertise, a solid knowledge base in the law and other things. And it was hard to see that these different AI models could, at one point when I was studying for the California bar, actually, could pass the multiple choice part of the California bar. Not the essays necessarily, which were the really tricky part, but this feels like the ground is shaking under you when you know how long it took to study for something like a bar exam, and this machine can just pass it. And this is something that domain experts are encountering as they encounter and work with these tools. And starting with that, I think, is so important. And when Chris shared with me his vision for Andus Labs and this idea that this was a really important moment so that leaders could be thoughtful about this and proactive and not reactive, that this could go better for all of us, I jumped right in.
I love the fact that it's a representative team of experts from different fields that are impacted in the most way, because you understand firsthand how this is going to impact you and the profession that you represent, but also brings the humanity on solving problem together. Give us just a little overview of what's behind the name.
Okay, well, it's pretty easy when people say, so what is Andus Labs? It's a pretty clear shot back to the name, okay? Literally what we do is in the name. So Andus is and us. It's the belief that the future is going to be driven by us, not machines, ideally. And have found, again, in a few decades of really being in, I would say, complex environments that have to adapt to new technology, in this case, AI, that there's a major challenge in really addressing it, practically speaking, which is, one, companies are successful for a reason, right? Especially the big ones that we work with, call it Fortune 500, Fortune 50s. And the leaders have a business to run, and businesses become even more complex in running them, in shipping products or services out the door, protecting margins, everything that you're graded as an executive or a CEO in a business to do. And yet you have this big, hairy challenge coming at you. And it's like, you can't, I would say, unwind your existing processes. And a lot of the new value is being created. It is very hard to make that transition without a bridge. So the labs part of Andus Labs is literally labs. How do we create spaces, environments, I would say places where you can move at the speed of technology versus the speed of your business, and do it in a way that's managed, controlled, I would say is accountable. And as new things get spun up in the labs, then A, you're not going to disrupt your daily business operations, and B, you can prove concepts before you put those back into, call it the operating workflows. And so when we were raising money for the company, spent a lot of time with executives, CEOs, and a lot of, I would say, tough VCs who ask very tough questions. And they said, what's your business model? Especially the VCs, and the way they reacted was, our business model is space. And they said, that doesn't sound like a business model. I said, if you've been in the trenches inside of big, complex businesses with operations to run and new things to sort, the space is the thing. And I've just seen it through working experience for years that committees typically don't tend to get a lot of stuff done. People in the labs do. And it gives the evidence, it gives the momentum, and ideally it gives people a sense of competency that's desperately needed right now as competencies are being handed over to the machine, and kind of gets into some of the territory that Jennifer was talking about. So the name is about people and about doing things and building things, which I think fits pretty nicely with your podcast.
It's brilliant. And first time when I heard Andus Labs, I didn't connect the dots that it's and us. And then having attended several of your events, it clicked, and it totally makes sense, because it's yes and us, technology and us, and all the innovation and us. But I think the labs part is also fantastic, because it gives you the permission to experiment. It gives you the permission to fail, because we're all navigating this new territory. We don't have rules. We don't have laws. It's all gray, emerging colors. So let's dive into the actual details.
Sure.
So, Chris, for you, like you just said, but I've heard you say this before, you've argued that corporations, they're not calibrated to incorporate AI at the speed that's required and the speed of technology. And everyone's at the same time is rushing to deploy it, but not in such a thoughtful way. And so how does Andus approach the kind of strategic patience that's required and that feels urgent, both for executives, but for leadership teams, to get that space? Like you said, that space is such a highly important thing to thoughtfully and probably correctly implement AI.
Yeah. So the way that I would say, to sound crass, sell the mission is by not selling. Okay. So what I've found, and Jennifer remarked on this earlier, this is different. And it's different because regardless of where you sit, there is a degree of fear. I think a degree of dread, and a degree of competence that everyone is struggling with, regardless of where you are in an organization. If you're someone who has been highly successful in any environment for 20 or 30 years, and you have to go back to school, like no executive went to business school to be an AI leader. So you have the issue of competence. You have this issue of, where do I focus when I'm running a complex business and when I have to essentially lead the company a different way? Like, you can't go in with the jacket and a bunch of services that says, hey, we can solve your problem today. You have to listen. You have to understand where they are personally. You have to understand where they are within their function, whether it's an ELT or an HR function or whatever it is. I think you have to listen intently on where there's excitement and progress. And frankly, you have to then really press on, how do your people feel about it? Once we get into, call it and it sounds soft, but the feelings part, it's very rare that you found any executives that are really thinking about the human part. Because one, it's a bit of a tech race. We have to embed systems in our businesses. Then we have to, given the expense, what's next in the headline that we're seeing now? Job cuts. This is going to allow us to cut jobs and do things more efficiently. Wow. In between here and there, there's a lot of work to be done. And even when you deploy these things, You have to find where people are and find people that can help advance, again, whatever the growth or efficiency agenda is. And you have to be pretty measured and do the work to understand, is this a good headline that's going to drive the stock price? Or is this an initiative that's going to make work better for everybody? To answer your question, I would say clearly, you listen, you try to understand, you provide entry points to build on what they're up to, and maybe expose some of these fault lines that frankly are make and break from a financial standpoint as much as a human capital or people leadership standpoint. And so that's why conversations like this become so important, because this isn't a part of the AI narrative. AI narrative, AGI, super intelligence, OpenAI, Google. Okay, now we're going to take people out and everything's going to be great. The bubble could be AI or a work breakdown inside of companies based on AI, not the financial bubble that everyone's looking at right now. It's hopefully not only on this podcast, but other discussions that we're having together, we really talk about the business risk and the, frankly, talent risk that we have by overlooking that reality when you deploy these things.
And I just want to add to that a little bit. I think efficiency is quite a narrow goal. And so part of these conversations is pointing that out. And with AI, the ideal situation is we are amplifying human potential. We are magnifying human creativity. We're just the exquisite human intelligence that each of us possesses is something that we are honoring, we are preserving, and we are amplifying. And that is something that it needs to be more a part of the conversation than we've seen, and something that when we walk in a room, we bring into the room pretty much every time. And it's a powerful perspective.
And that is the aspiration and that's the mission. But we're also dealing with leaders who are very much focused on the practicalities of what it actually means. Efficiency isn't always about taking a certain workflow and using AI and automating that or automating a large percentage of that's going to come. And I think we all have to recognize that's the case. That being said, AI is also a forcing function to stop doing stupid shit. There's so much waste inside of how work gets done in the companies that we all do business with, that when you start to question what does work mean and how do we get work out the door, there's a lot of things that maybe we should stop doing so we can get to the more creative, high leverage work that Jennifer just referenced. So even when we say efficiency is narrow, I think it's being viewed as a agent automation play. And clearly there's going to be value there, but there's way more potential for, call it, people leaders and business process people to just make work better, make it way better. And we're craving those conversations. And it might be premature in some cases. Yeah. Stella, it seems like it's triggering you. Are you triggered from that comment?
You have no idea how much of people taking AI to generate a lot of text and content. And then you have people on the receiving end using AI to summarize all of that stuff. It's like, can you just have a conversation?
That actually builds into a question I have for you, Jennifer. You've worked across startups and global firms. Where do you see the big gap right now, whether it's the builders on the tech side of this or HR legal teams on the inside operators knowing what's technically possible? What are you seeing?
This is an interesting question. I do think that there aren't yet established rules of the road that make it hard for everyone. And I'll give a little shout out here to the EU's AI Act, which went into effect on August 1st of 2024 and is going to be phased in the next couple of years. And its jurisdictional reach it's going to touch us here in the US. It's already touching us here in the US. And I think that will help with some of these governance questions. And it will help establish a norm, much as GDPR did for data privacy. Privacy by design is now industry standard because the EU passed GDPR and put it into effect, I want to say 2018. And I think the same thing's going to happen with AI. So there's this sort of norming that we haven't yet gone through that we are at the beginning of. I think that will help everyone. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that this transformation is happening at a much faster pace. So it's not surprising that builders will focus on builders, that everyone will focus on the things that they know. And this is where one of the challenges is to not get siloed in this moment. And actually part of the shift someone like me has to make from type A to type G, type generative, and thinking beyond the confines of your profession or your experience and things, thinking more broadly across a company and what it needs to do and how different functions can work together to make that better. Can be a real opportunity in that way. So I want to acknowledge the importance of governance and ethics. And actually, there's this interesting study I just read. That's one of the things holding us back is when you don't know the rules of the road, it makes it even harder to experiment, to be creative. So that's something that's very important. But then there's also this opportunity for people to get out of the boxes that they're in. And I say that both psychologically, actually, and also in terms of their role description, the department they're in, the function they think that they perform. And so it's with some guardrails, with some careful thought and guidance around ethics and ethical framework around this, there's a enormous possibility to recreate things in a better way than they currently are.
And I would just add that given everything that Jennifer just shared, that's why, again, labs as a bridge can be very helpful. It's very hard to roll out and condition people across companies that have thousands or tens of thousands or 100,000s of people. If you can get, call it a lab or lab setup, there's silo busters, there's safe spaces, there's ways of modeling how work can be done versus how work has been done. And again, we talk about efficiency. Think about just the efficiencies to be gained by sanding down the silos that global operations still work in. That's really difficult structural change that very few organizations are willing to take on. So you can hedge it. You can hedge it in a way to give you as the leader confidence and evidence that you can make things happen the way they've been, I would say, evangelized, but haven't necessarily been activated yet based on all the different studies that the consultants or universities are putting out there that lots of things are failing. There's a reason why things are failing.
So speaking of confidence, you end up in all of these boardrooms and senior execs who have a lot of confidence about how business ought to be run and what are the answers they already have. What happens actually in the labs that you're organizing? How the conversations go, how you manage to convince them to change the workflow? What is the actual work of Andus Labs when you land in front of some of these prospective clients?
Yeah, I think if we're being honest, the labs work is not necessarily, I think, kicked off the way we had hoped it would kick off. The labs thesis is really based on work that we did in our previous lives before we founded Andus. For example, I ran a social media lab inside of General Motors 15 years ago that it literally epitomizes everything that we're talking about and changed the interface between a global organization in the world, various stakeholders from dealers to suppliers to media to investors, on and on. That ethos then rolled through a lot of other, I would say, Fortune 50 assignments. AI is a little trickier, actually, to get off the ground, in part because social media was the domain at the time in, let's say communications, marketing, customer service in particular, because it was very much a public facing movement. AI, it's in everything. And I think going back to things like structure, governance, accountability, budgets, it's very unclear where that responsibility sits, given how pervasive AI is compared to early stage internet and social media, ERP. We're not just talking about, call it social technologies, like big rollout of cloud and ERP. That was the domain of CTOs and CIOs, right? This is like everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And so what then is required is and I think Donna, you asked, or Stella, maybe you asked, what are the gaps? There's still a big strategic gap that we're seeing, big. And so without getting some of the, I think, strategic refinement done, some of the governance done, some of the innovation that has to happen really quickly, it's hard then to get to the construct. So a majority of our work so far at Andus, and again, we only started the business in May, has really been in advisory work and convening different, I would say, thinkers to help leaders think more expansively about the moment versus just a tech movement and an efficiency play. But very soon we will start architecting with our clients obviously these lab constructs that we've been talking about so far on the call. And the whole key is, and us, it's with. We are helping to build competency inside of organizations. We aren't looking to be the next McKinsey or Bain that is really about being beholden to a consultancy to do your thinking for you. You have to do the thinking inside of your place and really help people build new muscles. And that's really what the business is. The business mission is all about.
So I love, as with any consultant, the iteration is inevitable. So you consult, you convene, and you co-create with your clients.
Thank you, Stella. We now have new messages for our website.
So you started getting into that question that I had in mind. And as someone who attended some of your events, I felt the difference in those 3 C's experience. But for those who haven't had the chance to attend or listen to some of the sessions that you've organized, what is different in your convenings? What are the type of people that you're bringing together? What are the questions that they're asking?
I'll start with a quick response, which is, I think part of the magic of Andus Labs is the diversity of perspectives and people that we do convene. And so whether we're working with HR leaders, we're also bringing in creative technologists, artists, thinkers, and that really changes the kind of conversation that we can have around a table at an event. And that's something that makes us quite different. And part of this is the importance of sense making in this moment, the importance of creating the space that Chris talked about, literally a convening space, a lab space, right? You can see that it's related, and bringing together the kinds of people who will help create that space and who will generate ideas and ways forward that we haven't yet imagined.
So the after now event, let's then be like, try to bring to life for the listeners, like what this might look like. So we felt, and we feel very strongly today, that the conversation on AI has to change away from tech supremacy to human agency. Those are both kind of generalized terms, and there's a lot that could be left to the imagination there. So when we essentially introduced the company, we created an event called After Now, meaning there's before this event and AI, and frankly, there's an after event in AI. And we are now in an after AI world, whether people want to recognize that or not. So what would that typically look like in other spaces? A lot of discussion around technology, a lot of discussion around, I would say, potential value and potential harms. It tends to get into, call it sociology conversations or psychology conversations, all that. We wanted to ground it in people who are not only thinking deeply, but doing things with it. So the person who kicked off the event was Brian Eno. Okay, for those of you who know Brian Eno or don't know Brian Eno, he has been a longtime tinkerer of creating sounds and artwork from new systems. So he, I think, as your listeners may know, if they're Eno fans, David Bowie, U2, Coldplay, prolific in expanding the range of sound and sound-like experiences that can be created. So what does it have to do with AI? AI is a new generative system that Brian Eno is playing with in finding what they're good for and frankly, what they're not good for. And the thing that he stressed, and we felt it was really important, and we didn't obviously message him, it just like everyone brought their embodied experience to it, that these things are really remarkable, but they're not efficient. There is a tremendous amount of work that goes into considering what you're doing, a degree of taste and judgment on what you spin up, then you put them into the system. And then what happens on the other side is your taste, your discernment, your judgment, your creativity. If anything, it has to be even better, right? And so Brian Eno is a generative thinker, embodies what we believe the future is for all of us, which is we're all going to have to DJ these things if we're going to be in business, or most of us. And then the end, I would say, person was someone who has actually lived it in a way that's so practical that anyone could understand. And Stella, you might remember that was Julia Dixon, who had a side hustle as a essay writer for kids trying to get into college. She had 50 clients doing it the pre-AI way. And now she has, I think the number's 500,000, because she created a place not only where Gen Zers or whatever they're called now can express themselves through essays, but express themselves more fully, because a lot of kids have a very hard time expressing themselves these days. And she used AI as her co-product partner, her gateway into raising capital, her co-CEO, and she was able to start a business based on an idea in her head without the typical infrastructure and cost structure you need to start a business. And we feel beyond the corporate work that, that needs to be done. Oh my God, is this an entrepreneurial moment for people if they really understand the creative potential with a hill to jump over that isn't as steep as you think it is? And so the whole day was like, how do we understand, think, and build with AIs? And the lineup was a very non-traditional lineup. So again, a pretty lengthy response, but it helps to, again, talk about what we're doing with a little bit of color, because it is different.
There's something before that, Jennifer, you mentioned, and I've heard Chris, you say it in the past, generative thinking, that I think is unique to Andus. If you both could just give a bit of a description for the listeners, I think it will be helpful coming off of that example you just gave from the After Now experience.
All right, so I'll leap in. So if we think about the world pre-AI and post-AI, what was the pre-AI design ethos that really became mainstream in the pre-AI world?
Design thinking.
Design thinking, right? Prolific work that came from IDEO and the Stanford D School, and was really oriented towards how do we have empathy as we think about designing new products, and to maybe a lesser degree, new services, but a whole method around understanding the user, understanding the problem, start to hypothesize and prototype, and then start to make prototypes that ultimately serve people's needs in a better way than how they were served before. Okay. Post AI, there's still a lot of design thinking into what we are thinking about, but it's different, right? One, generative thinking isn't just about designing new products and services. We have to think about redesigning everything. And that may sound hyperbolic, but think about workflows. How do we find, call it breaks? And we have a whole method around it. How do we explore the breaks in maybe a more opportunistic and expansive way? How do we then, as we work our way around the method, start to hypothesize what could be versus what has been? And then we get to work on really thinking through, in an ideal scenario, what would a different approach to, for example, communications and media be? And I'll come back to that in a second. And then how do we start to test it in a fast, iterative way that is second nature to startups, but is far from second nature inside of established businesses? And then based on the feedback loop, you have a pretty good sense of if you're onto something that's valuable or you flush it. And so design thinking, I would say, is the ethos of lab thinking. And I would say, to now make it tangible, we ran this thinking through, what does it mean when LLMs become the front door to knowledge and information versus search or website or even broadcast and print media? That's a break. We could look at it exclusively through the lens of search. Search changes from Google to Perplexity or OpenAI or whatever. It's actually way more expansive than that. And so we have worked our way around that exploration and through both, call it creative work, as well as market intelligence. We think that there's a whole new, call it machine readability approach, that every company is going to have to take if they want to be able to speak both human as well as machine. Those are two categorically different ways of thinking, developing, and optimizing, if we want to use that word. And it is going to be a huge shift in, call it, communications, media, marketing, and even risk. And so that just gives you a sense of the type of services that come from the kind of method that we are essentially incubating in Andus Labs right now.
Very helpful. And Jennifer, anything you want to add to that in the definition? It's okay if not.
I would just say, I think this is something I would encourage all of us to start grappling with, is how can we be more generative in our thinking? And what are the ways we're not generative? And how are the ways that we can open things up to be more generative? So there's both. Andus Labs is modeling out this approach that can be a roadmap for people. And I think this is going to be the age of AI, the age of generative thinking.
And again, going back to Eno, right? Part of Eno's messages, going back to type A, type G. What is type A? Mastery. I got it. I've learned it. I'm going to control it, and then I'm going to deploy it. Eno referenced the key to generative thinking is actually giving up control, especially in kind of the middle ground where the machines are doing a lot of, call it the generation of the ideas or strategies or content. So mastery is required in the bookends, but the generative thinking allows you to create things that go well beyond what you think could be. And that's why he is such a beautiful representation of not only creative output and input, but a mindset that I think we're all going to need if we're going to use these things to build the future versus automate maybe some things that are past their born on date. And in some cases are not serving us as humans very well right now. So there is so much territory in this type G mindset, as well as type G thinking, that who knows, maybe you'll invite us back to talk about it once we have some more case studies to share.
To make it real, for me, it clicked when Brian referred to the wind chimes. So in this generative creative flow, you always have a structure, and then you enable the rest to occur, emerge. So think of wind chime, right? You always have that physical embodiment of the wind chime, but how wind interplays with that structure is always different. So I was like, oh, it makes total sense.
Yep.
So if we double click to the things that Donna and I steep into and spend most of our times in HR, the exciting world of HR, when you obviously have a very strong point of view on how important it is for HR to play a significant role in this transformation, because really this is one of those human transformations, and it starts with human change and adaptability and changing the workflows, changing reward structures, everything that currently constitutes workplace context will have to be reimagined for this generative era. So in a way, we're asking HR to drive and be the rebels who are going to influence the change. On the flip side, HR has never been known for that. What are some of the advices might you have for HR practitioners to embrace this duality of the role they need to play?
There's two things that fit squarely in HR and people leadership, and that's being an advocate for the people that are in the company. And obviously there's a lot of things that HR leaders have to do to make sure, again, that the organization is set up right, that it's calibrated, I would say the business of it. But at the end of the day, HR is about people leadership. So being that advocate and being eyes wide open and having that voice very, I would say, tuned and strong at the table has never been more important. This is not a technology movement. This is a change management movement. Two is there is I think, a pretty serious misnomer that we can train our way into AI. I don't believe that, because it's too fast moving. And a lot of, I would say, AI instruction is pretty rote and overlooks, again, some of these psychological needs that people need before they then get into the classroom or the LMS or whatever the vehicles are that people are getting trained up on. The key here is moving from the idea of AI literacy to AI enculturation. You actually have to be in the work, and you have to see how it adds value, and you also have to be discerning on where it doesn't add value. And the last thing I would say is a lot of AI training is really focused on the individual, and very few of us make things happen inside of companies at the individual level. We actually make things happen through teams, actual teams sorting out things together through actual work. And so, one, at the highest level, how do we advocate? And I would say at the foundational level, it's how do we enculturate? And then in between, there is a lot of stuff that has to be done if we think about org structures of the future and all these complexities. But if we don't have the top sorted and call it the foundation sorted, the middle is going to become messier than we can possibly imagine. And I think HR leaders have a really important role to play in that.
Jennifer, from your perspective, especially since you're looking at it both through the legal lens and also operational lens, is there other considerations for anyone who is trying to deploy technology, who is trying to reimagine what the organization of the future would look like, to ensure there is access, there is equitable access for everyone, because this is yet another technology. And those who have access and have the training and have the privilege of being able to afford to play with it and learn will benefit in the long term.
Yeah, I'd like to say two things. First, this is a change management challenge, right? And so I just want to double click on that a little bit. Change is hard. I think we all know that. And you have to start with the people and you have to meet people where they are. And one thing that seems to be helpful too is when leadership can articulate why the use of AI will make things better for people. And so having that clarity and having strong communication around that is important, just as one little practicality. Now I'd actually like to pick up something that Nick Thompson shared with us at our After Now event in July. And that has to do with this question of how do we handle this moment? How do we ensure equity as best we can? How do we amplify human potential as best we can? And he quoted Audrey Tang, who is Taiwan's first digital minister. And Audrey Tang describes how right now there are two races. One is this race to the top. It's a vertical race to the most powerful AI. This is ruled by a couple of tech companies, market share, market dominance. And then there's this other very important race, the horizontal race. And this is the race that's designed for collective intelligence and ensuring that AI amplifies human agency. And so part of what I think is helpful here for people operations leaders, all leaders, to think about the role they want to play in that horizontal race. And the goal is that race runs as fast as the vertical one is running. Yeah.
To double click in the horizontal, this is expanding the use cases, expanding
it picks up many of the threads of this conversation. It's creating the space, creating the understanding, creating the ability to say this is hard, but we're going to learn how to do this. We're going to amplify human potential. We're going to get to be more creative. We're going to have less rote tasks that we have to be involved in, and we're going to get to be more generative in our work, and we're going to get to reimagine things in a better way. And it's so that space where there's this collective idea that this is going to be human-centered, that at the end of the day, basically that at the end of the day, our exquisite human intelligence will be acknowledged, honored, preserved, amplified.
We're all going to be the wind in those chimes.
Yes. Oh, I love that.
Whoa. Whoa. Do we drop the mic? Is the podcast done? That was really elegant.
A lot of great marketing for Andus today, and I love it. Before we do close, even though we probably just reached the pinnacle, but we have one question for both of you before we close, a bit of a provocation, if you will, with your conversations lately with clients or just even, let's say, people that you love to think and collab with. Do you feel humans are getting more capable or more dependent is the question that Stella and I have for you this week.
We're always trying to do the team machine, team human.
Can I answer the question differently than you posed?
Sure.
I think it drops into the frame of dependent or not. I think it's the way that we have to think about it as leaders is proactive versus reactive. Okay. And I would say that we're reactive. We are dealing with one of the biggest social experiments, if not the biggest, that we've ever encountered, with LLMs being upgraded and deployed without the kind of discussions that we're having today. And that means that we run the risk of, at the individual level and the collective level, of just leaping in without necessarily knowing how to operate in this new world. And my suggestion, I guess in my closing point, it's not necessarily a mic drop like Stella's, is that we really have to become more proactive around this. And our jobs are not going to protect us from reality. It's something that we shared in a different conversation last week. I think there's this either false sense of security that because I have a certain role in a certain business and my boss isn't like asking me to figure out AI, I'm cool for now. There's a lot happening around the towers that we all work in that we have to be very aware of right now, so we can be more proactive in making sure that the points that Jennifer has made any number of times, that like human agency is preserved. We can do it, but we can't do it if we're reactive. And so right now it's a tech story. It's not a human story. And it's about a tech change. It's not about, call it human change. And that would be a really inelegant way of answering your question, Donna.
And I'll add, the horizontal race is designed to center that human agency, is designed to allow us collectively to shape this moment.
I love it.
So a few things that I kept writing down as you were progressing. This is different. This requires competence, focus. It requires space to co-create and deal with the complexity. More importantly, this is about feelings, soft human elements. We need to be advocates and agents of acculturation. We need to amplify the human abilities, and we need to do it with and us. Thank you so much for your time. This was absolutely brilliant. So excited to have you early in our episodes, and we hope to have another episode with two other co-founders of Andus Labs, because there's so much to talk and bring to our audiences, and appreciate your time.
Appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Workestration, hosted by Donna Scarola and Stela Lupashor. Music by Philippe Visitiu. Everything else we're doing ourselves because someone has to walk the talk on lean operations. Find show notes at workestration.ai. Follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If this episode sparked something, leave a review or share it with someone trying to solve the same problem. Want to be a guest? Book time at workestration.ai. Thank you for listening.